The last two episodes of Cape Lomond focused heavily on the beginning of a subway network. Today's episode will see the introduction of the city's central station. We do of course have a train station in the city already, that's the one that's connected to our custom bus station. This one however will be a fully custom build and it will feature platforms below and above ground level. It will also have an adjoining bus station and come complete with tram connectivity. I'll be drawing a little bit of inspiration from Shinjuku train station in Tokyo, as well as this crazy station in China that Moose showed me on his live stream when I mentioned I was building an Asian inspired station. The very first thing I want to do is draw out where our future road arterial network is going to be. The last thing I want to do is put the station bang in the middle of where our major roads are going to be, and as I said on previous episodes, I want this huge straight road running the entire length of the map. With that in place as a guideline for future episodes, it's time to bring the railway lines into the future city centre. So we're going to have a couple of lines at least running down into the station on this level. I'm going to join up the existing two lines that run through the station to the north, and they'll run directly into this new build. I reckon for the main lines that are coming in, we will keep them sunken, and that should make things an awful lot easier when we get round to building out the downtown road network. So here on this station I'm going to start at the bottom and we're going to work our way up to a certain degree. I want several parallel tracks and I don't want to use platforms, platform assets, they're pretty wide. I think we'd end up with a huge station, so instead I'm planning on using just pedestrian paths, and these will be hidden from sight, but we'll get to that shortly. Once I have them spaced out the way that I want on the tracks, I'm just going to build up the frame of the station, and I'm going to continue using the standard pedestrian paths for now. Once I have all of these done, it will essentially be an extension of the pedestrian area, so we've started that already on our sunken subway station, and we're going to continue in that vein in this build as well. Eventually we'll have a fully integrated transport hub. We'll have subway, trams, trains, buses, and we even have the opportunity to potentially hook up the passenger harbour not too far away, just on the south coast. It should all be within walking distance of each other, which would be pretty cool to look at. In terms of positioning for the passenger stops, I'm going to make them nice and central within the train station track assets. Then I'm going to use the standard path assets to ensure Sims can actually fully access every individual route. I'll join them together using a combination of invisible path networks and the normal path networks as well, just because they're easier to work with. I'm going to be using two main assets for the build today, and they will be the Incusatorium signature office asset as well as one of the big EU 6x6 commercials. The plan here is to have the buildings connected with those walkways, and I found that the station was just a little bit too wide to support that look I was going for, so I decided to chop off one of the tracks, and that should enable me to come up with a more compact design, and I really like the short walkway section between the main asset buildings as well. At this point I want to get everything hooked up and make sure that it works, and that's both the train elements themselves as well as the path networks we've just put in. I'll quickly extend the sunken areas. I'll create some really basic connections at this point, and we will of course come back and we'll make it look an awful lot better a little bit later on. I'm going to be ripping up some of these tracks and redoing them. Here I want to have a fully functioning bus station right above it. That's actually a feature from the Shinjuku station, however my design will be a little bit different. I want to leave a larger gap between the train and the bus elements, and that's because I want to see those trains in action. So much like the subway build, I'm going to utilise some temporary buildings. We'll get the Sims in, and it's a quick and effective way of checking that the simulation's working the way that I want it to. All of those hastily thrown up buildings will of course be completely deleted once we have the station finished. So I had to adjust the path a little bit and just make sure that they can access both sides of the track on each of the paths, and it looks like it's all working as intended. Happy days. On the left hand side I'm going to be using the commercial assets, and I'll be having two of them side by side to look like a single block. I do want a particular orientation with these buildings, so to get them functional I'm going to need road access so the building can have services, and to get that done I'm going to squeeze a little road just between two of the tracks, and that will solve that issue. The tracks will need a little adjustment just to squeeze everything in, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I really like the back of this building, and I think having two of them together makes a fantastic facade for one of the station's main entrances. I'll use one of these industrial door decals like we did in the yard build, and we'll create a single entrance for the Sims. On the other side of the tracks, I'm going to use that big office asset. To get that functional, I'm going to create a service road directly under the wider pedestrian road, and then I can just raise the building into position. After a bit of messing about with the path networks, I will be able to align the pedestrian access with one of those doors at the front of the building. Should look good. For some reason, the game didn't like the paths that we put in, so to have a look at what's going on, you can open up dev mode and you can check the lane debug functionality. So you can see that there's no thin green line connecting the path networks together. Try as I might, I couldn't get that to work on that little node, so I decided to create an alternative path off to the left hand side, and that seemed to connect and work just fine. So having a quick check of all of the entrances and the paths, it appeared that we are good to go. It's looking good, and just to make sure, I wanted to have a quick peek at that middle pedestrian walkway linking the buildings together. I wasn't a fan of having the handrails showing between the buildings, so it was time to get the invisible path network out again, and as much as a pain that can be to work with different elevations, it wasn't so bad on this build. The heights don't have to be too exact either, other than the small section between the two buildings, because of course a lot of this stuff will be completely hidden. Once I was happy that they were working okay, then I just ran some more paths down to the tracks again. For the most part, that works okay. However, we did have this happen at one point which made me smile. I wish I knew how to replace that. We can maybe have some fun with a big outdoor trampoline centre or something. The station is functionally active, so it's time to start expanding on the other main features of the build. To create a frame for the station, I'll use an elevated pedestrian road cutting across along the top. This will give us visibility of trains coming in and out of the station. I don't want them to be completely hidden, as it kind of detracts from one of the fun elements of watching these stations in action. It'll also give us an opportunity to add some additional transport methods within the build, so trams, buses, etc. I went ahead and created another elevated road, and this is going to give us a starting point for our major bus station that's going to be situated directly above the tracks. For this bus station to work, I'm going to have to raise the ground, and I'm going to create tunnels going underneath. There are of course road networks within that bus station asset, and they're just not going to work if I try to plop them on the tracks and raise it. For each of these builds, I'm finally getting my head around the tunnel functionality. So here I'm going to use a drop of 12.5 meters. I think that's pretty much the minimum you can get away with, and it does prevent some crazy drops on the tracks. One of the tunnels was a little different, I guess. That's because of the node and the pillar on the road above. These are going to be hidden anyway, so it's not really a big deal. In this build, I'm going to use the original bus station asset. I think it has a real utilitarian feel to it, just like the one in Japan, and I reckon it's a nice little addition for the look that I'm going for here. And how about that? Pretty much a perfect fit. The gaps between the buildings will easily be filled with the use of pillars, and later we'll add more interest to the build with some more buildings and vegetation. I went and repeated the process at the back of the train station, and then went and sorted out the tunnel that was connected, as well as connecting a couple of bus routes just to get things moving. At this point I introduced a third track on the very lower levels, and this will serve some of the islands as we expand the city later down the line. Where you see the road network converging here, I'll more than likely create a few tunnels, and we'll get all of the networks across with that method. I went and plopped down another bus depot elsewhere in the city. That's just going to be a temporary location for now, and I think later we can make a bit of a feature of these and maybe create a huge bus depot and get a nice creative build around it. So let's have a look at the buses and the trains running. I reckon that'll look really nice once we have everything up and running properly. With everything working as expected, it was time to tidy up some of the roads and make sure that they're looking nice and tidy before we start on any of the pillar work or any of the detailing. So really just a case of deleting and redrawing anything that was looking bad or wonky. We'll check on the elevations and where we can redraw roads to ensure that the roads are connected to the ground rather than any unnecessary key walls, we'll do that as well. Towards the rear of the station, I wanted to create a little shopping street, and the way I'm going to achieve that is to draw another road at the end of the platform, directly under one of the elevated sections, and then we're just going to raise up the commercial assets to the level that we want. I'll nudge that row of commercial assets ever so slightly so it's just overlapping the road, and that will basically clear the barriers on that section of road, because of course it is an elevated section. Another elevated section of road directly behind it will give us a bit more pedestrian and tram options later on, and it will also provide some easier sections to detail, as it will break up the plainness of the pillar work that's coming up. The pillar work is pretty straightforward. It's just a case of drawing them out on a line, slotting them into position, and then just adjusting the elevation as required. These sections of road didn't always quite go in at the same elevation, so we might need a little bit of adjustment on the height here and there as and when is necessary. I wanted to create a little additional walkway through that pillar section, and we'll do that with an invisible path. I went and filled the other gaps using the same methods, and it didn't take too long. The very front section of the train station wasn't looking its best, but we're going to be covering that up anyway, so I'm not too bothered. Cool. So that gives us a pretty nice base to start making things look good. So I'll continue to tidy up a few bits and pieces that appear to be untidy. I want to connect a lot of these rail lines together so we can have multi-route access across different platforms. And then I went ahead and put the start of the key walls in. I don't quite have my mind made up whether or not I'll keep these in future episodes, but I did want to at least get them in place just to kind of get a feel for how they looked. They won't necessarily stay as pedestrian roads either, but at least having them framed off, it'll help me visualise how things are going to pan out in future episodes. I'll take a minute or two and I'll sort out some of the bridge sections over the railway. These won't be perfect, nor will they be the finished product, but at least they won't be looking super ugly, and it will give us some opportunity to detail later on when we start building in that area. I'm going to use the patio 2 asset again to create some sheet piling retaining walls. I really do love that effect. It's so much better than the existing key walls, especially when you're creating large infrastructure projects like this. I will use them extensively on any of the exposed key walls that have a big drop, and I'm going to use them to create and tidy up the tunneled sections for each of the tracks. This does of course have the added benefit that we're able to mask some ugliness and untidiness from the existing game tunnels. I'd really love there to be some proper tunnel functionality in this game that looks good, and you know, the shadow effects on these things, they definitely need a bit of work, don't they? Now, it took a while to get all of those sections in place, and then we had to go around and delete the props that come on top of the patios, but it's absolutely a worthwhile endeavour. It does make all the difference. So you might be wondering why things are looking a little bit different on the main station now. The reason for that is that, of course, I went and cracked on and built up things and forgot to hit record. Surprise, surprise, how often does that happen? So what I've done here is I've added a couple more of those big assets either side of the roads at the edge of the development. And all I did was simply drew a section of elevated railway through all of the 4 buildings. I've made sure that I've used the station track asset at a decent length, and I added a couple of stops bang in the middle where one of the existing buildings are. You didn't miss much. It's exactly the same method as I did on the very lowest floor when we were creating the tracks down there. And again, I just connected them all together with invisible path networks, just the same as you saw earlier on in the build. All I needed to do to get access was just simply move the buildings out of the way, and then I just moved them back in to the original spot with Move It. So I will just demonstrate. There's nothing crazy going on to get these through the buildings. You just draw it out as you would draw anything else out. I wasn't too sure whether or not to leave the train exposed so you could see it running, through the individual buildings, but I did decide to cover them up with pillars in the end. I think it looks quite a bit better, but also on a big facility like this, you would probably expect all the pedestrian access to be under a roof, have it covered. And I guess you'd also expect to maybe find something of a concourse within the building, with shops, etc. within the main train station itself. And I think covering it up lends to that idea. So in terms of getting the pillars in place, it's pretty straightforward too. It's just a case of creating a few stacks, putting them in place, and then getting the top pillars and just slotting them in to create a roof. Where the train is going to enter the station, I'm going to create a little bit of a covered entrance, and I'm also going to apply a number of grated decals to mask the walls and the windows of the original building. Now, I did say earlier on the video that I plan on creating something of a mega transit hub which will include every method of mass transit in the game. So now I want to add some trams, and this is the first time I've used trams in Cape Lomond, so that's quite an exciting milestone. I'm not ready for connecting it to the wider part of the city, of course, because we haven't got that far, but I do want to get things running and really just see how it looks. Next episode we'll probably be completing the transport hub most likely, and we'll take the opportunity to build something of a tram exchange, or maybe a station, not sure what you would call it. We're going to have space for that directly in between the existing 3 methods of transport, so it should hopefully, all going well, nestle quite nicely in between the train station, the bus station, and in the subway station. And I am excited to get started on that. Should look really cool. I created a little linear gardens, and the idea here was just to create one and then I can copy and paste the others into position. I finally realised once they were in place why props kept dropping, even though the elevation was locked. So it looks like when you Control and C whatever you've created, the elevation lock value drops off. So what I ended up doing off camera was to revisit the subway and individually lock every fence, tree, bush and fountain. I did the same for some of the props at the front of the station, but to save my own sanity, the ones that ended up dropping at the back of the new station that we're building today, I didn't bother. I just went and created a different design, and that new design I just plopped directly onto the pillars. I know they're locked and they're good to go. For the gap at the front of the bus station, I wanted to create some further office development, and they went in straightforward enough with snapping on, and it was just a case of raising the elevations in the building. And it gives us a nice, simple, low-level block of assets. I'm going to start adding a few buildings now to surround the development, and much like on the previous station build, it's essentially just going to be a bit of window dressing. I want to see how things look built up, so any additional buildings that you see me adding here on, it will be deleted in preparation for building a proper downtown. Now, these buildings between the subway and central station will go as we redevelop the next episode. It's always fun seeing that much pedestrian action in full flow, isn't it? But now it's time to detail up the station. I'm going to use some of the same methods that we used on creating the previous station. We'll also be using some of the same decals that we employed in the subway yard as well. I'll create the tiled warning borders, but these will end up pretty much covered up anyway. There's an indentation, however, that's created with these, and that actually remains even when we add the decals on, so actually really nice effect when you're zoomed right in. I used that really big dirt decal as a base colour for our sunken tracks, and I extended that throughout the entire key walled area, and it's nice and easy, not too time consuming, simply because the size of the decal itself really useful. Along the edge of the key walls I added some moss vegetation effects, which is nice, and to give some texture to the concrete tracks I added some concrete decals as well, and Broman surfaces again come into play, and they will always work really nice just to dirty up the track somewhat. I'll focus a bit more decal work towards the main station, and I'm going to add a bit more vegetation down there as well. Where I added electricity cabinets down by the lower element, I will add some broken concrete decals and perhaps give our engineers or our working sims a bit of a drier base to access that utility. To finish off the detailing on the lowest level, I added some decals between the tracks and I let them spill out onto the tracks themselves. The final decals to add is just adding a bit more concrete over here, which I really like the look of. As I was building, I experimented a few times with various colours for the main station building, and I think I'm going to go with some light colours. I think it works best with the integrated elevated railway track covered by the pillars, and I think given a nice copper looking green roof looks really sweet. The gap between the two middle buildings was still looking pretty plain. We do have a nice feature where people are walking across from one building to the next, so I think a nice seating area would work pretty nice here, and it's something you would absolutely expect to see in a train station. It does have the added benefit of being partially covered, which is a bit of a bonus for these sims if they're trying to avoid the never-ending sunshine here in Cape Lomond. To kick things off, I'm going to repeat some of the decoration that was used in the plaza previously. I like the look of the concrete planters with the small evergreen trees. As we join up all of these individual transit hubs, I definitely want to keep repeating some of the decoration and some of the assets, and I'm hoping that will help bind all of the individual transit builds together. For the little cafe area, it's just a case of throwing in a few food and seating props along with some signs, but it creates a lovely little bit of detail and it fills that gap really nicely with the impression that it's a lively station eating area. I did have a quick play about with and see if I could use any of the hangout areas, but I couldn't find out any way of raising the elevation on that functionality. Sadly, it looks like it only works on ground level, but maybe there's a workaround for that, so it's maybe worth investigating further. One thing you may or may not have noticed over this video and the last one is that we finally have commercial demand back in the city. So we created a load of buildings for background purposes and we fulfilled a lot of demand on most of our demand meters. Once I demolished all of those buildings that weren't necessary or needed, that demand came roaring back. Now that is interesting because I did the same many months ago in a vanilla city, and the very same thing happened. All of this commercial demand came back. So if you are experiencing issues with non-existent commercial demand, delete it all, and with a bit of luck you might find that that demand has come back. So I'm really excited about how all of this is coming together. This was an important step in building out our downtown. The next episode will feature trams pretty heavily, and then we can crack on with finalising the road infrastructure. I reckon we'll have some tunnels, bridges and interchanges coming up very soon. Depending on how long all of that takes, I'll get the city tidied up and I'll have it ready to share with you guys once it's all done. If you want to have a play about with the city or get a closer look to some of these stations or anything else that was built in previous episodes, then you will be able to shortly. I'll need a bit of time to get it all organised. I'll have a list of mods and I'll need to get some local assets ready for you guys as well, along with some of the instructions on setting it up and getting the settings all sorted out as well. I'll get everything on the Discord. Channel members and Patreon supporters will get early access, but it will still be free for everybody. All of this will be put on the Discord, so if you fancy getting your hands on the map, make sure you hop in and say hello. If any of you fancy supporting the channel, you can do through either Patreon or YouTube membership, and the links are on the channel homepage. So that's it for this episode. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.